I'm Greg Braun, Executive Director of the Guardians of Martin County, and I welcome you here to our next in our series of podcasts that the Guardians have been putting together about on a monthly basis about various topics of interest. Many people will know the Guardians for our work on growth management related issues. And I'll be the first to say I'm not a professional planner. So in my capacity as Executive Director, the Guardians often work with professional planners to help us decipher some of these very complex issues. So I'm very pleased today to have Kim Dinkins with us from 1000 Friends of Florida. Kim is the Policy and Planning Director for 1000 Friends. And so we do collaborate with 1000 Friends on a variety of things. So Kim, welcome to the podcast. And we will be doing this in both listen and watch mode. So we'll be putting up some graphics for various things that Kim talks about. But thank you for taking the time to join us and tell us a little bit about yourself first and then 1000 Friends.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name's Kim Dinkins. I'm the Policy and Planning Director for 1000 Friends of Florida. My background actually is environmental science. I have a master's degree in soil and water science, but the majority of my career has been spent in water quality and water supply planning issues. And then at the local level, urban planning issues, growth management type things. So I'm fairly new to the organization, 1000 Friends of Florida. Just started in November of this year. We started off with our legislative session. So one of our priorities is advocating for growth management and smart growth at the state level. So that was kind of the first thing that I've done. 1000 Friends of Florida has been around since 1986. We are the state's leading growth management, smart growth advocacy organization. And our tagline is building better communities and saving special places.
Yeah, that's great. And 1000 Friends has helped us out on a variety of things because it seems like Martin County has established a very well-deserved reputation for maintaining the urban services boundary and trying to do indeed smart growth kinds of things. So thank you for your help. We've asked 1000 Friends for assistance on various comprehensive plan related issues over the years. So very good. 1000 Friends does have a website. Tell us a little bit about the organization's overall goals.
Yeah. Our main goal is connecting citizens with planning. So creating citizen advocates is one of our priorities. We've worked with dozens of communities and hundreds of citizens and environmental groups, state leaders, and business groups to promote smart growth, which is really compact development that reduces sprawl and preserves our natural areas. So we were started in, again, 1986 by two really well-renowned folks in the planning world. Dr. John DeGrove is known as the father of, or grandfather of planning, particularly in Florida. And Nathaniel Reed, a renowned conservationist who actually is from Martin County. And that's one of the reasons that we've been so active in the Martin County area. And we're really grateful for organizations like the Guardians who are the boots on the ground in the community that let us know when things are concerning and have done really a lot of the heavy lifting with making sure that Martin County grows in a responsible way.
Right. Yeah. So in addition to our coordination on specific projects, I often do log in. In fact, later on today, you've got a webinar. And
we do.
So tell us a little bit about that whole webinar program.
Yeah, we one of the things that we provide to our members and the community is a toolkit. So our website is robust with all of the things that we've done throughout the decades that we've been in existence. We typically have multiple webinars throughout the year. Those are provided, again, free of charge and recorded. They're archived. Today's is kind of a deep dive into Bob Graham's legacy. But we have a number of projects that we've been working on, Smart Growth Principles, our 2070 project, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and just tools for our local communities. The kind of the framework in which 1000 Friends works is, again, providing that information to citizens so that they can go to their elected officials with the knowledge and background that they need to make smart recommendations for smart growth. We work again with the legislature, and then we provide these webinars and the citizen toolkit to arm folks with the information they need.
Yeah, well, part of the reason I'm interested in listening to the one about Bob Graham is indeed there is a connection between former Governor Graham and Martin County. Back in the 1970s, when the county started their land acquisition program, they bought a number of beach strips so that we would, so that Martin County residents and visitors would have access to the beach at locations all along Hutchinson Island. And one of those beaches is named Bob Graham Beach because he was governor at the time that that particular acquisition finally happened. So, yeah, I'm interested to watch that one and hear more about his legacy.
Yep.
Last year, you did a whole series of webinars about the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And I thought that was very interesting as well because we hear a lot about it. And I know from our Loxalucy Headwaters program that we are within part of that Florida Wildlife Corridor. But we keep hearing all the focus about it being over on the west side of Lake Okeechobee and then certainly going up to North Florida that way. But that was helpful in to me in understanding why we don't hear so much about the wildlife corridor on the east side of Lake Okeechobee. And it sounds like it's primarily because when the core area of that was put together, they were looking at the corridors for large endangered mammals. So Florida panthers and bears and that sort of thing. And they're not on our side of the coast. Not very many of them.
Right. Well, the Florida Wildlife Corridor is a huge project. It's gained national attention. It's was funded for the first time really in 2021, but it is a massive effort. It's about 18 million acres of connected lands throughout the state. And you're right that it does kind of focus on that western side of Lake Okeechobee, but that doesn't mean that Martin County doesn't have very important areas that are worth protecting. And so while there's a lot of attention being paid to the corridor, and we're really proud of the work that we've done with them and the University of Florida to advocate for that, we're also very interested in protecting those very special places in Martin County as well.
Yeah, very good. And that really is part of the impetus behind our Loxalucy Headwaters project to create a permanently protected corridor between Jonathan Dickinson State Park on the south and the Atlantic Ridge Preserve State Park on the north and the South Fork of the St. Lucie. So recently, the 1000 Friends was recognized for your webinars and other things. Tell us about that, let's say, Excellence for Grassroots Initiatives Award.
Yes, that award we just accepted in September. It was given to us because of all of the work that we do with our citizens, based on and I can't take any credit for it. We have some amazing people who've worked with our organization for decades, who help put on these webinars, but not just the webinars, also the outreach that we've done to local governments with our conservation partners. And so I think that while we are well known for our webinars, that does then lead to additional relationships, folks calling on us when there are development concerns that they have in their communities. And that allows us to really engage, again, at that grassroots level, letting people have the information that they need to make the case for saving special places and growing smartly.
Right. Yeah. Very good. So that's the conserving land portion of your mission. Yes. I checked on the website and I see a variety of other kind of key programs that you're involved with, one of which is safeguarding Florida's waters and springs. So we know the springs across the state are having a lot of problems. We just hear about those. Certainly in our local area, our focus is on the degraded conditions in the St. Lucie Estuary and the Indian River Lagoon. But your advocacy, Thousand Friends advocacy work is statewide. So briefly tell us about kind of the situation with several of the springs.
Oh, with the springs, I mean, we mainly have water quality concerns. Our nitrate levels have been increasing over the past decades. The majority of our water bodies throughout the state, but particularly in Central Florida, where we have springs, those are designated as impaired. So they have basin management action plans, and the sources have been identified for why our springs are impaired, and we are really just hopeful that DEP begins to do its job, and our local governments also have a responsibility to put into place the necessary water quality improvement programs to help our springs. Well, in addition to those water quality issues, we also have flow concerns, a lot of potential overconsumption of water, especially as we continue to grow here in Central Florida. But in terms of what 1,000 Friends of Florida advocates for, we are, again, smart growth, conservation lands. We're very interested in resiliency, making sure that our coastal communities are protected. And so we're focused on those water quality, resiliency, conservation, and smart growth principles when we're talking to legislators or other decision makers.
Yes, and so one of the things that Thousand Friends has done recently is we appreciate your endorsement of our Martin County Forever referendum that will be coming up here shortly. Probably by the time this podcast is released, that vote may have come and gone, but we're certainly grateful that you've not only supported us, but helped a variety of counties in their own individual land acquisition programs, which I guess overall in the last several years has been very successful in the voters passing those referenda.
Yes, nationwide, those referenda tend to pass based on the information that I have, and we're really excited about Martin County's program. Those programs are so vital because they allow local governments to leverage state funds and federal funds so that the money that the residents are raising and putting aside for conservation is multiplied through those programs. The state of Florida has dedicated about $2 billion to conservation programs, particularly for the Florida Wildlife Corridor, but there are also other programs that landowners can take advantage of to be part of that very large conservation budget that the state has now.
Right. Yep. And that's part of the interest by the Guardians and the Martin County Forever initiative is we've had several projects that are on the Florida Forever list for many years. The Blue Ways, our Loxalucy project is actually within the Florida Forever project boundary for the Atlantic Ridge ecosystem. And so our interest in hoping that the voters pass that referendum is that we will have matching money available to go and partner with the state on completing some of those acquisitions. So we thank you for your assistance in that. Part of the other things that you do, though, is help us out with transportation kinds of issues. And that's a difficult thing for me as an ecologist to try to piece together. I mean, we're dealing with wildlife mortality on some of the roads, particularly for us down in the Bridge Road corridor. But I remember reading one of the staff reports on one of the proposed developments a couple of years ago that was going to require 100 miles worth of road improvement, whether it's going from 2 lanes to 4 lanes or whatever it would be. So we have needed Thousand Friends assistance to help us analyze those kinds of things. But in the bigger picture, the comprehensive plan amendments for projects that either expand the urban services boundary or create these new freestanding urban service districts are one of the things that are of interest to the Guardians, because we're interested in the whole idea of compact urban development. Now we know there needs to be green space, within those urban areas before the urban services district boundary gets moved. But tell us a little bit about how Martin County has done in comparison to other counties in the state regarding urban services districts.
Martin County has some very robust policies around their primary and secondary urban services districts. And then they have this concept of the freestanding urban services districts, which is really targeted at industrial type uses or heavy, I guess we could call it heavy commercial. But the policy for freestanding urban services districts is really kind of tied into the comp plan within the industrial policies. Urban services districts are utilized statewide. They're in multiple communities, but their effectiveness really depends on the policies surrounding them. And Martin counties are pretty robust. Basically development is to be directed into those urban services districts. And Martin County has done a good job in their comp plan of identifying that. However, with these secondary and the potential for freestanding urban services districts, that really dilutes the effectiveness of those urban services districts when you start creating new areas that are eligible for public services. So we know that sprawl is costly. It takes money to provide that infrastructure, to provide the emergency services that are needed outside of your urban area, your primary urban areas. And so it's a little concerning. Again, on paper, looks great, but the implementation in so many places, not just Martin County, but throughout the state, is really where, again, that rubber meets the road of implementing your comprehensive plan versus just talking the talk. So again, Martin County has a great policies that the community should be very proud of, because I know you've advocated for that, and that's been the Martin County difference, I think, is what it's referred to. And it's, again, robust policies to protect your urban areas and your natural areas.
Yes, thank you. And one of the challenges that we have with this, just internally from a philosophical perspective, is when water and sewer are extended to areas outside the urban services district. And the challenge that we've got is we do recognize that from a water quality perspective, it is better to have those facilities on municipal, or in this case, county utilities for water and sewer services, rather than having hundreds or dozens of wells and septic tanks and that sort of thing. But the challenge that we have with it is by extending those utilities outside the USB, it's really just inviting more intensive development in those areas because they now have those utilities. So it's a dilemma for us. We want to support water quality things, but also not promote a lot of development outside the boundary.
Yeah, I mean, and that speaks to sprawl. I mean, this leapfrog type development where you extend services past other areas to get to new development areas is considered leapfrog development, and that is a characteristic of sprawl. And really the question is it necessary to locate those developments outside of your urban services district? If you're limited on the amount of land that you have inside that district, maybe the approach is to expand your urban services district, your primary urban services district, and not leapfrog over. In the case of Martin County, it looks like there's available land within the primary urban services district to create those commercial and industrial opportunities and your residential opportunities that you need, at least for the short term. But sometimes those areas aren't necessarily located in the areas that developers want to be. And so there are multiple ways that you can modify urban services districts, but if that's going to happen, that it really needs to be carefully positioned so that you're not having those leapfrog type developments.
Right. And so as we look at staff reports or review staff reports before various development projects are reviewed by the county and taken to the county commissioners, we know that there are about a dozen different tests about whether or not something contributes to or does not contribute to the proliferation of urban sprawl. And so one of the challenges that we've got is, I guess to be a pretty technical issue, but we have differences of opinion with county staff on whether or not a variety of these things do contribute to urban sprawl. Are we unique to this, or is this going on statewide? And how do projects keep getting developed when the analysis does show that they contribute to urban sprawl?
Yeah, I think the issue with urban sprawl is that the definition, although it's fairly clear, it says it meets a development pattern characterized by low density, auto-dependent development with single use or multiple uses that are not related. It's difficult to defend that something is not. It's easy to defend that something is not sprawl and difficult to demonstrate that it is. And so there's just, I think, again, that subjective nature of the definition of sprawl is what allows this to happen. And absolutely, it's not unique to Martin County. This is a statewide issue, and actually an issue around the nation. I think that, again, on paper, Florida's growth management policies are pretty robust compared to the rest of the nation, but there's always that wiggle room in the subjectivity of our definitions.
Right. So one of the ones that we have been reviewing most recently is a proposal for the Martin Commerce Park out at the southeastern interchange of I-95 and Martin Highway. And so I've pulled up from the staff report one of those criteria, and that is the proposed land use does not promote radial, strip, isolated, or ribbon patterns. And so to me, this site that is several miles from the urban services boundary, and it has one access road coming in off of the highway, and so all vehicles are going to be going in and out that. To me, that is one of these a strip traffic pattern. Now, the county, when they analyzed that particular issue for that project, they found that that approving that comp plan amendment would discourage the proliferation of urban sprawl. So I can't get my mind behind how that could be so. Can you give us any insight on that sort of thing?
Well, I can't speak to the mindset of the planners in Martin County. And I think that some of this is, again, that subjectivity. In traditional terms, strip development refers to those, we've all seen them, all have them in our communities, those single, large, long, fairly narrow developments of multiple users. So, you've got a barber shop, a dry cleaner, I don't know, maybe a little restaurant, and you have to access it from a main road, and you can get off of it in a main road. And so that tends to be the working definition of strip commercial. And so anything that's not that then is not strip commercial. But that doesn't mean that it isn't still sprawl.
Right.
So that idea of the single access and single ingress and egress, that is concerning. That's a safety issue. When you have a large development that only has one ingress and one egress, that's an issue for emergency services, as well as, just the myriad other issues that we have with sprawl.
Right. So it does make sense to me that having that commercial space immediately adjacent to an I-95 interchange, that does make sense if you're expecting the majority of the traffic to be coming in on I-95. But right. If the traffic that will be using this new commerce center is coming from Palm City, then Martin Highway is already often backed up with traffic. And so it doesn't make sense to us anyhow. So Several years
Yeah.
ago, the county had agreed to move forward with a Western lands study, and it was our hope that they would look at the big picture and identify wildlife corridors and areas that are appropriate for development, and alternatively, some areas that should be protected from development. So it was our hope that there wouldn't be more of these freestanding urban services districts being proposed until that Western land studies had been completed. Well, that hasn't happened, but we appreciate that both Thousand Friends and the University of Florida's Center for Landscape Planning is helping the Guardians do a Western land study of our own. But I guess that remains to be seen how the county's review of the Commerce Park and other freestanding urban services districts will evolve.
Yeah, it starts to require that we ask the question of, if there is a freestanding urban service area in close enough proximity to a primary urban services area, does it make sense to just expand your primary urban services district to incorporate all of those other lands within it, or provide some additional protections to the lands between? Another thing that that communities are grappling with now is the potential impacts of Florida's Live Local Act that was passed in 2023, that opens up almost every future land use zoning that goes along with an industrial future land use to residential uses. And so even though the intent here is industrial, there is a possibility that a developer could come in, meet affordable housing standards, and develop this area with some residences in it. And so it needs to be evaluated in that context as well.
Right. Yep. So that goes into the whole issue of Tallahassee essentially superseding governmental regulations, because as I understand it, if a project is proposed that meets the criteria for Live Local, the county has no say but to approve it. Is that right?
Well, they can establish certain standards that go along with those residential developments. So they do still have to meet environmental quality standards. They do have to protect wetlands consistent with the county's land development codes. So it's not just a free for all. There are limitations, but there are also some certain granted rights with those types of developments. So it is something that I think is going to be challenging. I know that it's challenging communities around the state, and it's something that the local governments are going to have to establish standards for.
Yeah, before we get off the urban sprawl issue entirely, I know there are these various criteria, and often as the county reviews them, although we have differences of opinion sometimes, often we agree that some of those criteria are not met. But is there anything that says if this project does increase urban sprawl, that somehow it would not be approved? Or is this just kind of you go through and evaluate it and it gets approved no matter what?
Yeah, that is where organizations or individuals have to then challenge the decision by the county commission in courts. And so that is actually a space that 1,000 Friends of Florida used to be very active in. There have been changes to state statutes that are these fee shifting provisions that would require a petitioner or someone who challenged the decision of the Board of County Commissioners. If they don't win their challenge, then they're responsible for paying the legal fees of the county or the person or group that they are challenging. And so that has put a real pressure on people to not push back against these decisions, because the funding is just oftentimes not there.
Right. So those preemptions are part of the challenge. But in one of these, we were successful, or the attempt was successful in contesting the project. And ultimately, through the courts, they did find that there was legitimate reason to have not approved this project. But then it went on to the governing cabinet as, the Land and Water adjudicatory commission, and they just overruled what the court said anyhow. That didn't seem right to us.
Yeah, those are unique they're case by case, obviously. We've again had success in some areas. Orlando is a good example of a place that 1,000 Friends was able to engage. Often, though, I think it's important for people for developers, the best case scenario is for them to go to the community and find out what the community's values are and try to develop in a way that is consistent with that. That would be your best case, is if that happened every time a development came through. But when these challenges come about, oftentimes even if it doesn't get to the courts, you end up with a project that's better if there's an opportunity for the public to engage, which is why we are so vocal about getting citizens to engage in their local government processes.
Yes, and I will give a plug here for Knight Kiplinger and his new field development in the kind of northwest of Palm City, because he did exactly that. He went out for, I think, like 2 years and did community workshops and programs to find out what the community wanted. He didn't have to do that, but ultimately, I'm sure the project was better because of that series of public comment opportunities, not in the strict sort of confines of 3 minutes at a county commission meeting, but rather really sitting down with the people and hearing what they had to say, and then taking those concerns or considerations into effect when they were working out the development plan for their project.
Yeah, I think there's a fear that if a developer engages with the community, that it's going to be this not in my backyard, that NIMBY scenario all the time. And so we as citizens of communities have to recognize that there are certain things that are going to change. I mean, we live in Florida, and it's it is the fastest growing state. We're welcoming 1,000 people a day. But so we as citizens have to recognize that there are going to be changes, and then developers, if in a perfect world, would be amenable to some recommendations of the community that they're building in.
Yeah, well, we're glad that the 1,000 Friends is in existence, that you've been in existence for a long time, and that you're continuing to engage the communities on that sort of thing. So let's circle back to that. You are a nonprofit organization, is that right? How does 1,000 Friends get their funding to do these things?
We are 100% privately funded. So we rely on our members, which if you're a donor, you're a member. We rely on the generosity of folks who are being impacted by growth in Florida, which is all of us. So you can donate on our website. There are plenty of opportunities to do that at different levels. You can, if you're a longtime listener or appreciate our webinars, there's a specific fund that helps us to put those on. And so we've just been really grateful for our longtime donors and folks who are newly hearing about 1,000 Friends of Florida and willing to help financially with the work that we're doing.
Right. And those webinars are all recorded, and you put out newsletters as well. And aren't there legislative updates during the legislative season?
Yep. During legislative session, we maintain a running list of bills that have been introduced and whether or not 1,000 Friends of Florida supports those or is in opposition to them. And then throughout session, we also provide weekly updates on the bills that we're tracking. And then we do 3 webinars, one in advance of legislative session, one about the midpoint, and then one as a final wrap up. So lots of opportunities to kind of keep track of what's going on in the legislature without having to dive into their websites every day.
Right. Yep. Well, we're coming down to the end of our 30 minutes here. The time has really flown by. I'm sure we could talk about a lot of these things in greater detail, but I appreciate the time that you have spent with us. And we hope that people who are listening to this who aren't familiar with 1,000 Friends will indeed go onto your website, look at some of those newsletters and webinars, that sort of thing, and become engaged. I know it's not really a a very sexy topic, this whole growth management stuff, but it does affect all of us as we end up sitting at traffic lights because there's no longer a requirement for concurrency and just all these different things. So I think we all need to do a better job at trying to engage the public in these kinds of things. I mean, it shouldn't take 3 golf courses in Jonathan Dickinson State Park to rally people behind growth management kinds of things, but we know that it does, unfortunately.
Yeah, those acute attacks are what does rally people up. I think, we have a citizen planning toolkit on our website that I mentioned before. So if you're new to this concept of growth management and urban planning, go there and take a look at the resources that we have available to you. I think that it's really, again, it's very important for citizens to be engaged at the beginning stages of a development. So once you see a sign go on a property that says coming soon, it's too late. You have to get engaged early on. And so that does mean paying attention to what the county commission is doing or your local city is doing at their planning and zoning meetings. So their land planning agencies meet pretty much monthly, and paying attention to that will give you a leg up on helping to advocate for smart growth before it's too late for these individual projects.
Right. Well, we try our best. So thank you for your assistance with that. Okay. Thanks, Kim, for taking the time with us. Is there anything I have forgotten to ask you here? The time has really flown by.
I just wanted to highlight the work that 1000 Friends of Florida has done over the past 8 years or so, where we've looked at multiple scenarios in Florida, the sprawl pattern, a conservation pattern, and then also looking at what might happen with sea level rise between now, 2040, and 2070. And we learned that Florida is losing about 120 acres a day of agricultural lands to development. And so I just encourage people to take a look at the various scenarios that look at what might happen if we follow the same path of development that we're going down now versus really putting an effort into conservation and smart growth principles, and looking at how Florida might develop if we implement some of these good tools now to save about 270,000 acres of undeveloped land and 5 million acres of protected natural and agricultural land under a more conservative approach to growth management in Florida.
Yeah, so we'll put up those maps of the different growth scenarios, and you've done it not only statewide, but you also helped us out in Martin County with those same scenarios. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, that data set is what we're basing our Martin County Western Lands study on as well. So we're excited to work with you on that.
And with that, we've come to the end of our time. And actually, this is about the last of our scheduled podcast. We started off on this about a year ago, and we've recorded them about once a month, and we're interested in moving forward with that. If anyone who's listened to this has suggestions of topics that we ought to cover in the future, we would love to hear about them. We've got one more coming up with the Native Plant Society, the local chapter. And after that, we've got an open book for scheduling and different kinds of topics. In the past, for those of you who have listened, you know that our webinars have primarily focused on other nonprofit conservation or growth management kinds of organizations that we partner with. So Florida Oceanographic Society and others. But if you have ideas, please let us know, and we look forward to continuing these podcasts. And we will continue also to send out e-blasts every time a new podcast becomes available, and they are recorded and also available on our website. So thanks again, Kim. We'll look forward to continuing working relationship with 1000 Friends.
Yes, thank you so much.